Pseudoscience is the set of beliefs or practices that masquerade as being scientific and lack scientific rigor via the scientific method to support their claims. Unfortunately, nothing has been pseudoscience more than the brain sciences and sciences attempting to explain behaviors. So today on Brief Brain Facts, we're discussing the pseudoscience of correlating particular personality traits to areas of the head, phrenology. The brain sends information to and receives information from the body via wires or nerves that converge to create two distinct nerve pathways: the dorsal root, which enters the back of the spinal cord, and the ventral root, which is located towards the front of the spinal cord. In the early 1800s, it was discovered that these roots carry specific information. The ventral root carries information from the brain to the body. Severing this results in paralysis. The dorsal root carries information from the body to the brain. Severing this root results in the inability to detect sensory information, like temperature and pain. These findings sparked a whole new line of thought within the neurosciences: localization function. After all, if two important roots communicating between the central nervous system, the brain, and spinal cord, and the peripheral nervous system, nerves and ganglia side of the CNS, display two different functions based on location, would it be possible for the brain to also have functional localization? Well, pretty soon after discovering that the ventral and dorsal spinal roots serve differing functions, researchers got their answer about functional localization in the brain through a method known as experimental ablation. This method involves intentionally damaging specific parts of the brain, then observing what happens. It was through this method that French physiologist Marie-Jean-Pierre Flourens discovered that coordination of movement was carried out by the cerebellum, and that the cerebrum was responsible for sensation and perception. It was these discoveries that captivated Franz Joseph Gall, who, believing that bumps on the skull corresponded with bumps and wrinkles in the brain, proposed that one could predict the personality of others based on their head dimensions. So Gall collected hundreds of head measurements and correlated these measurements with certain personalities. Using this information, he wrote the official textbook on phrenology, which was published in 1827 and sold over 100,000 copies. Phrenologists believed that the brain was comprised of several different organs, and that these organs acted like muscles because their size was dependent upon use. If you used the intellectual portion of your organ-brain part, it became larger. If you failed to use your love and caring brain organ part, it shrank. Importantly, phrenologists believed that these sizes could be linked to sizes of certain areas of your skull. Although phrenologists were not taken seriously by the scientific community, it gained widespread popularity and was influential in psychiatry because, like other pseudosciences that have widespread appeal, it helped confirm people's existing beliefs. Phrenology relied upon the personal validation effect, the cognitive bias in which people believe things as being true if it's personally meaningful. So if I were living in the early 1800s and my head measurements indicated that I was an extremely funny individual, well, that's a solid conclusion. Therefore, phrenology must be a solid science. Not only did phrenology confirm beliefs people had about themselves, but it also was utilized to confirm beliefs people had about others. Specifically, it was used to justify class and racial inequalities. For example, upper-class individuals used phrenology to identify via subjective validation themselves as having the ideal head shape, because that isn't subjective at all. Due to the idea that the brain can be exercised like a muscle and become substantially larger in ideal areas, the lower class accepted this narrative. Thus, this helped perpetuate the belief that via hard work and dedication, without any financial or social advantages, the lower classes can become a part of the upper echelon of society, even though, as today, becoming a part of the upper echelon of society was incredibly difficult, if not nearly impossible. But the narrative gave people a sliver of hope, making it all that more appealing. Of course, this wasn't the only discrimination that was justified by phrenologists. Race classification and racial superiority was used by phrenologists to either justify slavery or call for its abolishment. However, the abolishment justification was never under the assumption of general equality, but under the premise that due to the inferiority of certain races compared to those of Caucasian descent, these races should be protected and not enslaved. These phrenologists also argued that the inferior races could potentially make improvements in a few ways, like via intensive education. In phrenology, we see the first intensive efforts of using the so-called sciences of the brain or mind to justify racism, specifically with Samuel George Morton's book, Crania Americana, which utilized cranium measurements to argue that one's mental faculties are innate and Caucasians' innate mental faculties are far superior compared to the mental capabilities of other races. 2. The Bell Curve, a book arguing that intelligence was innate, and that this innate intelligence was determined by race. This is a commonality you will find in past and present scientific racism, that race is a real biological construct, and race somehow determines people's innate mental abilities, although both claims lack scientific evidence. Without getting too much into the weeds here, it is important to understand that race is a cultural construct, and the markers we utilize, such as skin pigmentation, reflects nothing more than traits that manifest due to environmental factors, not genetic differentiation. Further, mental capacities such as intelligence may be heritable to some extent, but social factors often determine what is acquired throughout one's lifetime, such as acquired skills that are measured on psychological tests such as intelligence tests. Performances on such tests are susceptible to things like socioeconomic status and other environmental influences. Nevertheless, debunking false information hasn't prevented people, including the American Congress, from making broad changes based on inaccurate and outright racist information, such as using IQ tests as a means of overhauling the entire immigration system, which actually happened with the passage of the Immigration Act of 1924, ending Ellis Island as a key immigration point of entry and limiting the number of people allowed to immigrate into the United States. Luckily, scientists continue to debunk pseudoscience, as one of Phrenology's biggest critics had done, the aforementioned physicist Marie-Jean-Pierre Flourens, who demonstrated that the cerebellum and cerebrum accomplish different functions. Via the ablation method, he tested Gall's claims and found that the impacted areas never carried out the function proposed by Gall. Finally, French neurologist Paul Broca put everything to rest when he presented 2 patients who had lost the ability to produce language, while their ability to understand language remained intact. When these patients died, he performed an autopsy, examining their brains, and found damage to the left frontal lobe, thereby concluding that this area of the brain was responsible for language production. As such, this area of the brain is often called Broca's area. And when damage to the area is noted, resulting in the inability to formulate language, it's often called Broca's aphasia. With findings by Flourens and Broca, Gall's claims regarding phrenology were being dismantled. However, Gall got something right that sparked a whole new understanding about the brain, that brain function is spatially organized. There seems to be a clear division of labor in the brain, but not in the way proposed by Gall, and none of which even remotely correlates to the size of the head and structure of the skull. Another takeaway that we can learn from phrenology is that we all should remain skeptical regarding pop cultural claims about the neurosciences and psychology. With the emergence of products being sold to help stimulate or unlock the brain's potential, we should practice caution, as the truth of the matter is that a lot about the brain has yet to be understood. So the best way to approach emerging trends in pop culture regarding the brain sciences is to practice a healthy amount of skepticism. What's a popular trend regarding the brain sciences that you will approach with a healthy amount of skepticism? Comment below. If you liked what you saw, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel, and take a look at our Patreon page for updates and perks for our members. As always, thank you for watching.